Hi, Dave Levine here. Thanks for joining me for episode number 10 of the Sports Stories podcast. So far, we've had a fantastic range of guests, including international coach developers, heads of coaching, coaches, senior leaders and Olympians. Well, today we have another incredible story from our special guest, Sara Symington. Sara is both a senior leader and a former Olympian. I'm so looking forward to speaking with her. I know she'll be really honest about her experiences and will provide insights into the world of performance sport from both a performance athlete perspective and a senior leader and performance director perspective. I'm also keen to hear what learning she has taken from sport into her roles in business and conversely, what she has taken from business into sport. So it gives me enormous amounts of pleasure to welcome my special guest for today, Sara Symington. Sara, it's really, really great to have you with me today. Thanks for giving up your time. I appreciate that it's a very busy time of year, given the circumstances around the coronavirus and lockdown. And I know from our previous conversations, you've got a huge amount going on. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you. I'm really excited about talking with you today on the Sports Stories podcast because the times that I've got to know you and hearing little elements about your story in terms of your cycling career, being at the Olympics and Commonwealth Games and so on. Also, your work in the business world and in the police, and now having come back into sport, it just is an amazing career. And so hopefully today we can give our listeners a little bit more of an insight into your story. But also what I'd love to try and give them is, as well as that insight, is some tips and some guidance as to how they can be inspired by your journey. So I'd like to start us off really with, can you share a little bit about your first experience of sport, your introduction to it, and then we'll move into actually your journey through. So your first introduction to sport.
Yeah. Well, where do I start? I suppose I was that kid that played every sport possible all the way through my school. It ranged from squash to hockey to swimming to cross country to athletics to windsurfing to sailing, karate, you name it. I wanted to give it a go, if I'm honest with you. So that it was so important to me, and I just loved and craved every opportunity there was. And so that kind of really, really did drive what I did next. And I kind of went to Warwick University, and I wanted to be a teacher, if I'm honest with you. Well, that's what I thought at the time. And I went to Warwick University and started a teaching degree. But after a year, I changed my mind. And there is a bit of a theme that's probably going to be here in terms of some of my journey to date is I'm someone to try things, but if it's not quite right for me, I will change, basically, or I'll make the decision to change. So I ended up going to Loughborough University. I know, again, sports science, a lot of people have tread this path. Great 3 years. I mean, every university journey is a great experience, basically. And my two sports at that point were predominantly squash and hockey. And a bit of running as well, actually. So when I finished my degree, I was like, what next? And I'd started to venture into the sport of triathlon at that point. And to be fair, I ended up going into the police. And you could say, why the police? Again, I had a few friends who were doing it. And at the time, sports science probably wasn't as established as it is now. You either went down the research route or you went and worked in the gym, if I'm being brutally honest. Yeah. But I kind of thought I'd quite like to go and try the police because it sounded exciting. There was variety in it. And again, that's probably something that I've always searched for in what I do on a professional level is the variety of what a role, where it takes me, but also where it stretches me as well. So for the 3 years, I was a police officer, and that was a great experience. And if I'm honest with you, it's 25 years since I was doing that role, but it taught me so much that I've taken through my career, whether it was dealing with life and death situations, not that I've had to deal with any in the sport world, dealing with conflict, dealing with, people that need pacifying, negotiation skills, resolving emotional disputes, to the compliance factor, to writing up reports, to, finding out data and working with legal, to interviewing people. So to be fair, that whole experience of 3 years has really, really stood me instead. At the same time, I was venturing into triathlon, and I got onto the cusp of the Great Britain triathlon squad at that point. Right. And I was coaching myself. Don't do it.
Why not?
Why not? At that point, I didn't know myself well enough, and I was trying to work full time, do shift work, plus coach myself in something that I didn't know enough about, and I ended up with chronic fatigue. That's the short story. And it took me about 2 years to almost get to the point where I knew what it was. And I kind of traipsed around different doctors, GPs, consultants, because I genuinely did not know what's going on wrong with me. I'd train and then I'd kind of like literally be absolutely fatigued for 2-3 weeks at a time, and it got to the point where I was so tired I had to quit training basically. So it was through Richard Budgett, Rod Jakes, who's the CMO of EIS now. He referred me on to Richard Budgett, who was the doctor of British rowing at the time.
Yeah.
And it was the first person that almost helped kind of put a label to it as to what I was experiencing, and it was a form of overtraining syndrome / chronic fatigue, whatever you wanted to call it. And at that point, I was then starting to explore what I wanted to do next. I'd really loved my 3 years in the police, but I couldn't see myself continuing it long term. Yeah. So some might say this was a cheat option, but I went back to university and did a master's in sports science. I mean, I had explored other career opportunities, but I also recognised I wanted to probably go back towards sport. And to stand out, at the time, I felt I needed to go down the master's route. So I'd saved enough money, put myself back through a master's. I did a bit of part-time work, lecturing at Loughborough, and also teaching self-defence for the police. Brilliant. So yeah, just trying to keep, money coming in to pay for X, Y, and Z. But at that year, I didn't do any exercise whatsoever because I was still coming through chronic fatigue. Rod Jakes, who's the head CMO of EIS, he very kindly helped me come back, or guided me as to how I got back into exercise. And by then, the world of triathlon, or the sport of triathlon, had moved on. It'd become a foot race. And whilst I could run, I wasn't going to run 32, 33 minutes for a 10K. I was down to about 36, 37 minutes. And that's where the sport was going. So cycling had always been my strongest discipline. And the guy that I was living with at the time, still a really good friend, he said, "Why don't you ever go at road racing?" And and that's how it happened. It happened by mistake. I entered a few races in this country. I won one. I got second in another. And I basically got talent spotted, for want of a better word. And it was that my break into professional sport. I'd always envisioned going to the Olympics. I had this childhood dream. How or when or what sport, who knows? But essentially, this is where it started. And that was the start of my journey. At that point, I was writing up my dissertation. I was looking at other job opportunities. I had my dad in my ear, go and get yourself a proper job, because he could see me getting sucked into this cycling piece. But I was very fortunate. I was selected, I got this phone call out of the blue, selected for the Commonwealth Games in 1998 in Kuala Lumpur. I can still recall that moment in time. I had to get the person that told me to repeat the message 2 or 3 times, because I was like, what
does that feel like, Sarah, when you get that call for such an amazing event which you've been working towards or aspiring for?
It didn't feel real. I mean, it literally, I hadn't come through a pathway. I hadn't cycled competitively. So really, I was 28 years old as well. So, there was that factor as well. And one thing I think, it just felt unreal. But, again, I just grabbed the opportunity. And this is, again, something that I always come back to in terms of looking in my past careers, about grabbing opportunities and see where it leads to. Whilst I only had £250 in my bank account and there was no promise of money whatsoever, of which didn't come on board and for another 6 months, through, British Cycling basically testing me to see whether they were going to pick me up and I was of the right ability and trajectory to be able to establish, medal success or podium success. So I kind of went with it and begged and borrowed some money. Went to Commonwealth Games, I crashed. And I'm being brutally honest with you, I had the power, but I didn't have the skill set and the library of experiences about how you want to road race at that point in time. And I think, again, it was about learning fast, about how I translated that, but learned from the experiences that I went through as a cyclist to be able to, accelerate my learning, but also execute wins or execute podium finishes through those experiences. So I was on a fast track approach, I'd say.
How did you learn fast? What did you put in place to accelerate that, given that's what you needed to do?
I was really fortunate. There was a couple of riders that were experienced, and they were very, very... Yvonne McGregor, she went on to medal at Sydney Olympic Games, of which, that was one of my biggest achievements, if I'm honest with you. I got selected for those games within 18 months of kind of entering the world of cycling. So she was very, very passionate and very open with some of her knowledge, basically, and learnings, which I'm still in contact with her. That's, there was a real connection there. Then our team manager at the time, a guy called John Herity, who had raced professionally. He was a real, real great mentor for me. And I used to pick his brains, basically, continuously about what he learnt, but also just, the roadcraft and the ability to read races and what to do at certain points. So, and then, yourself, you have to kind of soak up everything that's happening in front of you, but also there was a big aspect of getting to know who you were, but also getting to know how your body reacted to the training. And having gone through that chronic fatigue experience, in some ways accelerated it, because I had made some really bad mistakes in terms of that triathlon piece, and that taught me a lot about me and my body and how it reacts to certain elements of training. So I went into a sort of program that it was very much about big blocks of volume, of which I experimented with, but I also recognized at certain points my physiology and my immune system could not soak up that amount of volume. And we had to become quite creative around the training program that I followed. But also I had to be quite brave at times to turn around to coaches at that point and say, I'm not going to do that. Or I went out on a ride, and within the first 20 minutes, I knew damn well that this session wasn't right for me to do on this given day, and be brave to make the call to turn home, go home, and just go, okay, that's not going to happen today. I'll try again tomorrow, or try again the third day.
I'm blown away with everything that you're saying there, because there's so much in it, in terms of your learning and your journey and the bits you've picked up. And you've shared some aspects around the physical knowledge that you've picked up about the capacity of your body. I'm wondering what you learned in terms of your psychological, your mental side, because, that's some journey you've been through. And I'm wondering what drove you sort of psychologically to push forward and keep going?
I think I probably had already elements of it. But if anything, it really grew me in terms of being able to deal with, every sport person goes through an emotional journey in their career. And there's typically more lows than highs, let's face it. So it's about how you actually bounce back from it. You became more resilient. You dealt with things that didn't go your way rationally. And it's hard, it's easier said than done. But some of those experiences in those 6 years have definitely helped me for the next part of my career take forward. And I think we all know that road racing, and it's not to compare other sports, road racing is brutal. It is absolutely brutal in terms of psychologically. I spent 99% of my time knackered. A, because of the amount of training we used to do. B, the racing is again pretty hardcore. And I think you just start to realise, your physiology again suited certain courses and certain races, but they also taught you how to work with a wider team and your communication piece, because you couldn't necessarily all talk together. You had 6 in a team typically. And it taught me a big thing around teamwork as well, but also being realistic with yourself and your teammates when you weren't on it or you were on it, because there was often a strategy before you started the race as to who was the protected rider or protected riders, or vice versa, who you were riding for. So whilst I digress a little bit in my answer,
good. Yeah.
It just taught you a whole range of things that essentially I brought forward into, future career. But psychologically, I think it really did. I'm always about can rather than can't.
Okay.
That's a big
motto, nearly.
Yeah, it is my motto.
Mantra.
Yeah. And when things got tough, or you were on a certain climb and you were in that lead group and there was 4 people there, and again, my physiology, I was very good up to about 10k, but over 10k it was the 50 kilo diesel engines that would start to come in. And it's about showing no emotion, playing poker. It's like a game of poker in road racing. And not giving away how much you're hurting, if I'm being brutally honest with you, or controlling your breathing, but also using your knowledge about what's coming up, and also being able to, I suppose, squeeze the pressure on others at certain points when they don't expect it, and also you think, I can't do any more. So it's a whole mind game, actually, that you're having to play out on the road in certain situations.
I'm loving what you're saying here, because for me, there's the story is even, if you could take the cycling out of it, and there's so many key principles in terms of all the environments you've worked in, or any job in some ways, in terms of the, looking at what's up ahead, the mind games of it, managing your emotions, dealing with your team and the various aspects around that. There's just so many key principles you've kind of picked up there and transferred.
Yes. And I suppose at the time you don't recognise that actually this is what you're learning, and it's any time through years since and reflection, and also going through some challenging times or some really good times, that you actually draw on those experiences, but then you also start naming what you actually started to learn. And that's probably why I wanted to kind of, particularly the police bit, it's taken me till recently to recognise how much I learned in that environment.
Well, and that was going to be my next thought and question, actually. Whilst you were in it, did you realise the learning you were picking up and what was going on? Or is this kind of retrospective in terms of your reflections back on your experience?
A bit of both. I think, when you're faced with live situations that are happening out right in front of you, dealing with, domestic abuse or a riot, a football riot, these are live situations that you literally have to deal with there and then. And one thing, I know it's a bit of a motto, you've got 2 of these, 1 of these, you really do learn that how you have to listen very carefully, and you can't go full guns in a lot of these situations. And it's about working with people that you don't know. They're going through different emotions themselves, but it's about, I suppose, reading body language, listening for cues, but also being able to make decisions under pressure at certain points, and taking control of certain situations, and in some ways leading, but also in some situations stepping back from certain situations that might be potentially life-threatening to you as a person. So going back to your question, I think you did realise that you had to learn very quickly on the job. There were certain aspects that you had to become quite versed in. But I think it's through years and reflection that you start to understand how powerful or how impactful some of those situations have moulded you as a person.
Amazing. And taking that forward, then, can you give us a sense of your greatest experience, what's been the highlight of that part of your career?
I think being selected for Olympic Games within 18 months of taking up road races, genuinely, it was something I dreamed of, but I never dreamed it would happen so fast. And I would find myself in a team of 3, lining up at the Olympic road race, of which, I kind of came in the top 10. I ended up in the 6th position. Again, I kind of reflect and not wanting to go down the negative aspect, but again, I was still missing, I suppose, a library of experience that possibly could have, if I had that, I could have probably, possibly, maybe, could have, would have.
Who knows what?
Would have been up into that podium sector, but I still see it as a great, great achievement, something I'm incredibly proud of. And leading up to that, at World Cup level, the World Cups has just started to come into women's racing. I was the first woman to podium at World Cup level in this country. And again, I think it broke the mould and broke the ceiling for others to believe that it's possible, because GB at that time, in a cycling perspective, did not have that credibility it has now in terms of being able to get on the podium and win medals. And I hope that through me actually achieving that, it inspired other girls, other women who have cycled since, that it is possible.
So really pushing boundaries there, weren't you, at that stage, and what's really intrigued me so far about your story as well is, coming in through what might be deemed as not the kind of traditional route, through the traditional pathway, and also being, 28 or so, you're further down the line in terms of your career. And, I love it in terms of it, identifying that there are so many different ways to progress through a talent pathway here, and I think you've illustrated that for me in terms of, how you've navigated it. Were you conscious of that at the time, or how's that played out for you?
I think obviously as I've worked more in the sports system, yes, I probably acknowledged it, if I'm honest with you. I think there are certain sports that offer those opportunities, and obviously there are certain sports that don't, like the likes of diving, gymnastics. We know that is a sport you have to be doing since the age of 3, 4. But I think, I think it's really, really helped me remain open-minded, particularly when you're kind of looking in, or you're working in sports, and not writing off people too early, because you just don't know. We all know that performance and talent development is not linear, and everyone will go through different ages and stages of development, but also you just don't know what is going on in other people's lives, basically, sometimes, and you have to take that into consideration. But I also appreciate now, in the roles that I have done in the last 10 years, at some points you do have to make quite hard decisions around people's selection going forward. But in the next breath, I have tried to remain agile and quite open-minded.
Sara, you mentioned there the roles you've done in the last 10 years. So you obviously transitioned out of the sort of the performance environment in terms of an athlete into a different environment. Can you tell us a little bit more about those roles that you've played? Yeah,
I mean, again, I was always intrigued with the business world, and that's where I went next after cycling. Again, it was an opportunity that I grabbed with both hands. It wasn't something I went looking for, but it was through one thing I've learned is about having a strong network of people. And it was through someone I knew that offered me the opportunity to go into the world of commerce. And I worked with Zurich Global Insurance, and I worked with FTSE 100 250 companies. I didn't know anything about insurance, by the way.
Why did they come and give you the opportunity, do you think? What was it about you?
Fortunately, he competed in the sport of bobskeleton for Great Britain. So there was an affinity and a connection there.
Yeah.
And also he worked in that particular business at the time, quite high up. And also it was a passion of his of trying to help support and mentor people that he believed could really add value to the business, but also he knew what a sports person ultimately could bring into the business world in terms of some of the behaviors, the traits, the skill sets, and the personality traits that sports people often have. So,
and in summary, what are those for you, do you think?
In summary, resilient, learn fast, agile. I suppose those are the three mental ones.
Great. No. And so you got invited into this environment through an opportunity. So a door was opened, and you just, as you said before, you like the variety. You take your chance, and off you went.
Yes. I packed my bag, sold my house, and moved down to London.
Wow.
And entered that world, which was, again, I really don't regret anything I've ever done, and it taught me loads, in terms of what that business world was, but also how I actually looked at budgetary controls, corporate meetings, and I wouldn't say I'm a natural salesperson. However, I had to learn fast, again, how to do that and grow lines of insurance with these FTSE 100 companies. So, you were measured by that success. So in some ways, I likened it to your professional supporting environment. You are measured by your success. So it translated into this commercial world. And I don't know whether it was luck or judgment or whether I was doing an all right job, but I brought in £1.25 million of business within that first 15 months. And for someone that had never really worked in that world, that was deemed pretty successful, which was great.
How did you do that? How did you bring that element of money in, or what was it that inspired you, or what behaviours, traits did you bring to it to achieve those goals?
I think first and foremost it was about relationship building with the people that you were dealing with.
Okay.
And often they wanted to talk about my background and my experiences.
Okay.
And it was often that kind of opened the conversation to I suppose a relationship build and some common interest in often many cases. And I'm not saying it was just because of that, but often it was about then how did I weave in the business aspect of it, and why Zurich, but also why they needed and wanted us to be able to support or underwrite their streams of insurance for their particular business. So it was a craft I had to learn. I didn't necessarily feel always very comfortable doing it, because without downplaying it, I don't think it's probably one of my strengths. However, it had to become something that I was well versed in. So I think it was a combination of my own background, relationship building, but also being very clear on the messages, and also the brand, but also the value add that particular company could bring.
It's always an interesting dilemma, though, in my mind, about this idea, and you mentioned it earlier on about, I'm not really a natural salesperson, or I didn't think I was a salesperson. And then you're telling me that you brought in 1.25 million or whatever. And I'm thinking, how do those two things go together? Because I'm really curious, I guess, in terms of what sales is, and what you saw sales and what the attributes, again, that you brought. And you've mentioned this idea around relationships, and actually that was your key part to selling here, is actually connecting with people and engaging with them and speaking to them. And actually by finding out where they were at, then you were very successful. So I'm just sort of playing with the idea here that actually many of us think that we're not very good at selling, but actually it's how we define it, or how we see what selling is, or the term that's put to it.
No, I think you're probably right, Dave. Yeah, that's a good way of reframing it, actually.
Well, and I'm only saying that because I was in a similar boat. I was in a sales role for a long time, never thought I was any good at it. But actually now I recognise it's about connecting with people, and that's one of the strengths you've said you've brought all along, is how you work within the teams, understanding individuals, being agile and flexible, listening, using your ears rather than your mouth, and actually by just doing those really good, solid, basic, personable things, we deem to be successful.
Yeah. No, good point. You summarised it very well. Again, I'm on a self-reflection piece here as you kind of replay that back to me.
Because I do, and I'm curious again is how that relationship bit and the strengths that you've built over time from the various opportunities you've had have really gone through your career. So you were in the sales job within the big commercial context. Where did you go next, and how did you take those with you, those attributes?
Yeah, where did I go next? I think I kept on looking over the fence back into the sports world, if I'm brutally honest with you. And I kind of ventured, or I took the next opportunity that I found, and that was to work in UK sport as a performance advisor for 3 years. a great learning experience, opportunity, a privilege in terms of working across the whole landscape of the Olympic and Paralympic sports, and working in a great little team, if I'm honest with you, where there was some really, really fun people to work with, but also some people with quite diverse backgrounds that I really learned from as well. So it was, the essence of the job, and there was a big tranche of money that came into the sports system at the time, leading up to 2012. It was about having a portfolio of sports and working with the CEO or the performance director of those respective more mature sports. And then on the next level, there was a lot of startup companies, for want of a better word, the likes of fencing, wrestling, volleyball, handball, that you were, then some of those sports were mine. You were literally having to roll your sleeves up, help write their performance strategies, recruit their first head coaches, find a location to actually host athletes, help them identify athletes, and almost get the basics in place for them to prepare and hopefully qualify for the 2012 Olympics. So again, the whole experience, it was working with a whole raft of different people and programs, from startups to far more mature sports like the likes of sailing, etc., that have been in existence with lottery funding since 1997.
Wow, what an amazing opportunity! It sounds leading into a kind of a home Olympics as well.
Yeah, so I didn't stay around in that role for the home Olympics.
Okay.
After 3 years, I kind of then started thinking about what's next. And I'll be honest with you, I was kind of getting a bit itchy in terms of, I actually would like to go and work in a sport and almost, again, I'm more of a doer, if I'm honest with you. I roll up my sleeves and actually create, lead, and really have a sort of like hands-on approach in a sport. And I knew there was probably one opportunity left before 2012 in the role of a performance director, and that was at Archery. So that was with overseeing the Olympic and Paralympic programs, plus the non-Olympic disciplines as well. I knew nothing about archery. So that's where my next step in my journey or career took me, was to Archery GB. And I spent, a really, really exciting 5.5 years there, and learnt loads, if I'm being brutally honest with you. And this is where I suppose I took some of my learnings from archery and then transferred into the netball world, because both programs, if I'm being brutally honest with you, needed an overhaul. Not only from a strategic sense, but from a budgetary sense, and also identifying the right people in the right roles and making sure we had the right athletes with the right coaches. And that's what that's a bit of my mantra, if I'm honest with you, that, get the basics right. And in both roles particularly, it took an inordinate amount of effort, not only by myself, but the team that we put in place to do that.
So that leads you into the role you're in now, which is, just tell us a little bit more. So you're in netball, and your role is
performance director of England Netball.
Okay.
So
what does that mean for those people listening?
Gosh, every day is different. No, I oversee the performance and pathway programs within the sport, and that starts from the age of 13 all the way up to the Senior Roses team. I also sit on the exec of the wider business of England Netball, and I also sit on the Super League board, and that's the domestic league that runs in this country. So it's quite far-reaching and far-reaching is how I describe it. But I've also had the privilege of being involved, particularly on the exec side, about the running of the wider business, but also the commercial side of the sport, which is a big. It was a big reason why I took this role, if I'm being brutally honest with you, because the CEO at the time, that was her background. She was the old commercial director of England Netball, worked in that world for many years, and I started to identify that probably the role of performance director was going to start to change over the years, and it wasn't just going to be simply around performance and talent development. You were going to need a bigger skill set about how you ran businesses, but also the commercial side. And how sport was changing, and it was becoming more about sport entertainment. And you can sort of see that in an array of different sports.
And Sara, how is your kind of motto of, you mentioned earlier on about, the kind of can-do attitude. Can you give us an example of how that's played out in your current role, where you've really kind of come up against a bit of a challenge or a brick wall or whatever, and you've used that kind of motto or attitude mantra to help you through?
Yeah, so probably one thing I've had to learn is to be more patient and also see a more longer term game than a short term, and also be more skilled in probably how I get to that end point. And it kind of goes back to what I've said earlier, the path is never linear, but actually translating that into a work environment as well. Because I've just had to become more patient in many ways as to how we might get there, but also remain open-minded as well as to maybe what those steps look like. Because sometimes we all know that we get to a certain point and we know that actually going forward might not be the best in the best interest for whatever reason. We might need to kind of go backwards, or in some ways take a side step to kind of move forward. So I think it's I'm not explaining this very well, but just remain focused, remain can do, remain agile, but also creative in how you might take those next future steps.
And I got, just looking forward, you've given a real sense of the role being, as you say, broadened out into being kind of all encompassing. You're running very, very many aspects of the business or being involved in. And I'm wondering, looking forward, we're in quite a challenging economic environment at the moment. What do you see some of the challenges down the line being for either netball or for sport in general?
Yeah, I think we can already start to see what it's looking like. The obvious one is finances.
Right.
There's no two ways about it. I think women, I'm talking about women's sport, we had great momentum, real great momentum, and particularly in the netball world as well. It's about how do we keep that and almost like reignite it and restart it. But also bring people with us, but also commercial partners as well, because it's not just the sports world, but it's across the whole industry, set of different industries. I think everyone's going to have to pull the belt in a bit tighter. So if anything, it's going to challenge everyone to be smarter in how we might approach things, and also creative as to how we go about doing things. So those are probably the immediate ones, and I hate it when I kind of come back to it's the finances, but in some ways that's what drives a certain aspect of what you need to do and put in place. But it's a lot around, I think I go back to partnership building, and also partnerships across the sport as well, and not only just other nations. So a big part of what I've been doing in the last 8-10 weeks is actually working far closer with the likes of Australia and New Zealand, in terms of some of what they're going through, some of what they're coming through, but also some of their lessons, but likewise what we're going through as well. So it's about it goes back to building greater relationships and using others.
Which is great in terms of the threads from everything you've spoken about, and I've kind of logged down here in my mind things around the power of relationships in all of the roles that you've worked through, the power of team building in all of the relationships that you've had. Again, the power of what you said earlier on about the importance of having a broad and a wide network is being really key to this. And, and I'm smiling in a sense of actually, I wonder if you're not just the right person for this particular challenge, because you've faced many challenges along your journey, and you've always taken the small opportunities and the doors that have opened and gone through them, and I appreciate this is a particularly difficult time, but I guess we're needing people now with that can-do attitude, who are up for taking the opportunities that present themselves and doing a lot with little. And what I mean by that is, you've come into two sports that needed an overhaul and actually needed to be moved on, and actually maybe even really sort of grounded, and sports that are in a good position now will probably need an overhaul of sorts, given the landscape we're going into. So maybe you're really well prepared for this.
Thanks. No, and you have picked up on a point that I have actually identified, through both opportunities. I've had to work with, quite small budgets, if I'm being brutally honest with you, compared to a lot of other sports, bigger sports. And that has taught me really about to make every pound sweat, and also be really focused about where we put investment and why, and the purpose of it behind it. So, no, I agree with you.
What also fascinates me about your journey is the diversity of your experiences, yet they're all kind of still feeding in this very day, in terms of budgets is quite key at the moment, but actually you've had an experience in other domains around finances and budgeting, relationships, where you've had experiences. So you're always calling through from your past experiences and utilizing them. And I don't know if you're aware, but actually one of the terms that you've used lots, which I just think is fantastic, is I learned to load there, and you've learned such a lot in every experience along the way. And for me, anybody that's listening and can only be kind of inspired and encouraged by the fact that just grab everything you've got and learn as much as you can from it, because there's always something that you can call back on.
No, I know. And I think again, I love learning, and I think I will always, want to learn more, or I really enjoy meeting different people from different backgrounds and learning about their journeys as well. And in some ways I've had to push myself, into out of my comfort zone on occasion, where I've identified maybe I'm not particularly skilled at X, Y, or Z, but likewise, just picking up little gems from different people. So, again, looking at opportunities, I sit on the Performance Director Strategic Group in this country with some really, really, experienced people and performance directors. That's been amazing CPD for me to be able to pick their brains.
And them.
Totally. And likewise, I've picked up 2 non-exec director roles for SkateBoard GB as a sport that's starting out on its journey, and the British Boxing Board, which have been in existence, a very successful program for many years. And it's not only about, this is one thing I've really become more and more passionate about, is actually I want to share some of my experiences, but also I want to help others in this industry, either through some of my experiences or some of my mistakes or some of my successes. But ultimately, I really enjoy giving back to people that are on their respective career journeys.
Well, Sara, that's why we're here today, talking, sharing your journey to help others. So I think you're living your aspiration to share just by sharing the story today. So, thank you for that again. But before we go on just to the last bit, where I want to fire a few quick questions at you, I just want to take you back at full circle here. And again, you mentioned there about your thirst for learning, and you love learning. And I'm just thinking again, for those listening in, either embarking on a journey in sport or even throughout their career, is how and where does that thirst for learning come from? Can you create it, develop it? Where did your thirst for learning come from?
Oh, gosh, I haven't thought about that. I don't know. I really am struggling to answer that.
Okay.
I just think I've always been quite curious. Right. I always want to know. I always want to know more and why.
Asking that question why a lot, is that something that's kind of been driven into you to therefore dig deeper?
I think it's a female thing, if I'm being brutally honest with you. And I can say that as a female, because, joking aside, you thought that when I came into netball that I would bear that in mind. That has really, really, really taught me something in terms of, working with a predominantly, well, it is all female athletes, pool. And I have really had to think hard about why and how I present certain information to get buy-in. So whilst I think I've always asked it as an individual, it's been even more drilled into me as to how you collate information, but also present the whys to a set of athletes, but also staff as well. And I genuinely believe that, and this is a very generic statement, but I think the female population do ask a lot more whys, and maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. And therefore, to be successful and credible, you've always felt that you needed to have that backing and that information to be able to hold your own.
Yeah, and I've gone and done loads of personality, tests, etc. And I do know through age, that I've got to know myself better, that I am very much a factual person. I draw on evidence, I draw on facts. I don't draw on hearsay or fluff, is how I describe it. I like to know my subject matter, and I like to have underpinning principles around things that we are going to do or discuss. So again, I think that's probably a little bit of an insight as to who I am, but also part of my traits.
Yeah, and your thirst for learning. If I need to keep finding stuff out and understanding, so I feel quite solid in what I say and what I do.
Yes.
Amazing stuff. And again, I hope that just gives an insight into you, but also asks others that kind of question about, what drives them, what are their desires, what is their kind of fallback position in terms of who they are, how they work, what's important to them to be able to motivate others, and also to be kind of credible in whatever environment that they're in.
Yeah. Okay,
so just before we sort of draw the conversation to a close, what I tend to do is to really want to give the listeners some real nuggets to take away. So I'm going to fire a number of questions at you, and if I can get you kind of quick, short, sharp answers as best we can. But hopefully this will give some other people a bit of an insight, both into yourself, but also give them some takeaways. My first question to you, which we've not touched on at all actually, is books, and where you've drawn some of your information from. But I'm just wondering what the 3 or 4 books have really informed or currently would be on the top of your reading list.
Oh, wow. I'll tell you the recent ones I've read, or ones that have kind of stuck in my mind.
Brilliant.
So I've been doing some mentoring work, and I'm about to embark on an exec coaching PG certificate. So,
lovely.
Yes. Time to Think by Nancy Klein is one. So I'm currently reading that. 7 Heavens, about the Fijian Sevens team. I love that book in terms of the whole cultural piece, but how Ben actually went and worked with that particular team and brought them on so far. I really, really found that fascinating journey. A Surgeon's Notes on Performance. I like to look at different fields that really, really you can't make mistakes. Basically, there's high world-class expertise there, and
that is life and death, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. They've got to get it right. So that's one read that I found quite fascinating. And then probably the last one is Redemption by John Mccoy. He was the guy that was in prison for quite a few years, and he's come and he's sort of almost turned his life around and really got into the sport of triathlon, but used the power of sport to inspire others, and particularly kids. And I think I follow him on Twitter and Instagram, and I think it's fascinating.
Brilliant. Wow. Eclectic, but with a common theme again, of really deepening your understanding, your thinking, and also what I really love is the kind of the cross pollination from other domains, looking at a surgeon, but also looking at somebody from different sports, for instance, or from different domains of psychology even, so I think it is eclectic, but I think that's great. Moving on, what piece of technology or software would be your go-to? Oh
gosh. Well, listen, I've had to learn my way around Teams, Zoom, everything possible. So listen, I've embraced it. There's definitely power in everything that we're doing now. I don't like my life to be driven by technology is probably how I'd phrase it. Okay. I understand the importance and also how it can help you. So there isn't one particular app, if I'm honest with you. Yeah. I like to have everything on my phone in terms of my bank accounts, my private email address. The weather, it's just having everything at your fingertips, but I wouldn't say there's one particular.
Okay, no, good. I like that. I'm conscious again, right back from the start of your story about all of the performance environments that you've been involved in, and actually you watching yourself and how you perform to be your best. How now do you physically and mentally prepare yourself so you can be the best version of you?
Prepare. And I've learned the hard way. And I say prepare, over prepare in some cases, and really, really make sure you sit down and prepare you before you go into something that you do need to prepare for. I'll give you a little reason why, an insight. Yeah. I failed my A-levels.
Right.
So that was one of my probably biggest lessons in life. I did not prepare. So how can I expect to have passed?
Right. Wow. What a great learning right back then, which you've taken through, or it's informed your journey. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty powerful and still remains pretty powerful in my world and what I do. Also, I think I've learned a bit of self-talk. If I'm honest with you, there are certain things that I go back to and certain keywords.
Which are?
I can, I will, I do. It goes back to my cycling days when things got tough. It was about the positives basically and reassurance aspects of it.
Wow, great! Simple, but yet so powerful.
Oh, I'm simple. I like basics. There's usually the three things that I kind of draw on whenever I think about things that I need to kind of come back to. And then the last one is probably breathing technique. If I'm nervous, I really trying to ground myself and come back to being present and control of my breathing. And that comes from my cycling days as well.
Great. Some magic tips there, Sarah. Thank you. If you were to win the lottery and you won a substantial amount of money, how would you spend it?
Oh, I'd love that. I'd pay off the usual boring things. I'd pay off the mortgage. I would donate some money to certain charities I'm particularly passionate about. I would cycle the world and go travelling. But I would also want to continue working in some guise. I don't think I could not work. And I don't know, and it wouldn't be full time, don't get me wrong. But I enjoy working. I enjoy
what you do.
What I do, yeah.
Great. I like that. What advice would you give to your teenage version of yourself? Given your story and your career?
I don't think it's anything that I didn't do, but I didn't necessarily know that I was doing it back then. Keep up your education, because a sporting career is pretty short. Have that education, to fall back on, and also get as much work experience as possible. And it doesn't necessarily have to be paid for.
Nice. I like those. And again, what's really blown me away is the various environments that you've worked in and the opportunities that you've taken. And I know this might be quite a tricky question, but who are the three most impactful people you could identify or who come to mind throughout your career?
It's really hard to narrow down to three because there's been lots of people. I think probably a PE teacher in my secondary school, particularly, who really, really encouraged and supported my exploration of all these different sports. There was a guy called Mick Thornywell who I was in the police with. He was a sergeant or inspector, actually, who I cycled with loads, and he taught me loads about riding my bike. And that's before I fell into the whole world of cycling. And interestingly, he went on, and his wife actually was the first woman to walk to the South Pole. So they had adventure through their blood, basically. So that's probably why I got on so well with them. Him. And also, basically I spent miles staring at his back wheel, grovelling. But also he was quite an inspirational guy in terms of just teaching me and sharing with me some of his experiences on a bike. And then lastly, I think I've already alluded to him, a guy called John Herity, who was my first team manager in my cycling days, along with Peter Keane, who set up the British cycling programme, who was the performance director, and he did coach me for a certain point in my career.
Great. And again, really inspirational people, but at different stages in your life, which it's lovely to sort of call back on and never forget those that actually set you on your way, which is really, really key. Sarah, you've shared your story. For me, it's been amazing hearing it, the highs and the lows, but also some of the key principles that have driven you through your journey. I'm just wondering, whose sports story would you be really keen to hear?
Can I have two?
Oh, go on then.
And for different reasons. Serena Williams, I mean, for me, to someone to stay at the top of her sport for so long is incredible. And I know there's been lots of books and documentaries, but I would love to spend a day or a few hours just kind of talking through what that looks like and what it really was, as an Afro-Caribbean woman, also the longevity of her career and how she's managed to keep herself and her body together for that long. and that competitiveness and drive. Fascinating. And then more controversially, Lance Armstrong. Outside of the obvious, and I know that, again, I think I've noticed that he's going to tell us the truth this time. In the last 2 weeks, he's promised another sequel to his past confession. I would just love to understand. I would really, really like and be fascinated to spend a few hours with him and understand his career, but also him more as a person. And it's not about the drugs, but it's about, he was still very, very talented. He was incredibly talented, but I would also like to understand, a bit more about the why. Wow,
two very interesting people for different reasons, but actually both at the top of their game, or being in the spotlight, which I think is incredible. And it would be lovely to hear their stories further. So there's a goal for me there, or for us to try and see if we can get them to have a podcast with us. But Sara, I could talk to you all day, and I would love to spend more time sort of digging deeper and hearing more, because I'm sure you've only skimmed the surface of some of the stories and the experiences you've had. But I just wanted to draw us to an end and say, it's been a real pleasure for me hearing your story. I did know parts of it, but I've learned so much more about you today. But I've also taken a number of tips away, and that sort of desire for learning and to taking opportunities and having that sort of positive I can, I will attitude has driven through both our conversation today, but also I can see how it's really helped you in your career, both in sport, in business, and then back into sport in a kind of a more administrative managerial role. So thank you ever so much for sharing that with us. And I'd just like to say, if any of the listeners would like to hear a little bit more from you or find out what you're doing at Netball, how might they follow you or make contact with you?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm the biggest social media use. However, I am on Twitter and Instagram. So at Symington, Sara Symington for Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. So again, I think that's been a theme through this conversation we've had. I really enjoy meeting new people. So if people do want to reach out.
There we go. What I'll do is I'll make sure that the contact details are on the show notes below the podcast. So thanks for sharing those. Really, really good luck in the challenging times ahead. And I know you won't see them as a challenge. You'll see them as a I can and I will. But good luck with that. Thanks again for your time today. And let's hopefully come back together again in a year or so's time and see how we're getting on. We could have episode 2. How does that sound?
That's great. No, more than up for it. And thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure.
Great stuff. Well, thanks, Sara. Take care. And we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thank you.
Wow, so there we have the incredible story of Sara Symington. What an amazing and interesting journey she's had. I particularly liked the idea she just played loads of different sports as a young person, following her interests and enjoyment. Her career path was then by no means straightforward, linear or traditional. The transferable skills and experience she gained in the police seemed to be really beneficial in all that she did. I loved her conviction and bravery to change things when they were not working for her anymore, recognising that triathlon was not for her, but seeing the opportunity in the cycling discipline, with the result being talent spotted in her late 20s. This was incredible. After many career highs in cycling, and I'm sure there were some lows, she took the opportunity to experience working in business, finance and the insurance world, once again learning many new skills and gaining many experiences. It was becoming clear that there were themes and key principles evolving from Sara's story. For me, they were as follows. Her great thirst for learning, she created and took the opportunities that were presented, and lastly, she demonstrated and maintained a positive attitude at all times. So based on my reflections from Sara's story, I would like to pose the following questions to you. What self-talk do you have that does not help you, and how can you change it so that it becomes more helpful and effective? And lastly, what opportunities are you not taking and why? I do hope the questions prove helpful and leave you to think, and that you enjoyed listening to the podcast today. I'd really appreciate you letting your friends, family and colleagues know where you can find the Sports Stories podcast. We're on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google and Spotify. It would also be appreciated if you could leave a brief review on Apple to help guide potential listeners to the great content. And lastly, please make contact with me if you have any feedback or comments that would help you get more from the show. So from me, Dave Levine, have a great week, and I look forward to having you with me for the next episode of the Sports Stories podcast.